about what's really happening here?
Well, of course, the truth is both. And if you take a look at what AI is doing, the transformation in science, biology, sociology, the way we deal with information, it's extraordinary. But what happened 20 years ago is when I was working on this, we did not understand the implications in the technology industry of what this would do to society. And so the book is about what AI will do to society, most of which is good, but some of which is very worrisome.
So if you could go, actually, let me ask it this way then. If you could go back in time 20 years ago, and now we're talking really about social media and the way the internet exists today, what do you think you would have done differently?
Well, the key thing that we now understand is that AI systems optimize against a specific objective function. Literally, they go for whatever you train them for, if you will. And if you look at what's going on, for example, with social media, they're trying to maximize revenue. The best way to have revenue is to have more engagement, that is more usage. More usage you get with more outrage, therefore you get more outrage. And the AI that we foresee will be much, much more powerful than what we're seeing right now. And so we're going to have a lot of this. We're going to have a lot of people being manipulated in one way or the other, and that's not good.
And therefore, how do we prevent that?
Well, it starts with trying to figure out what the real problem is. And the real problem is that these systems are going to spend more and more time affecting the way our world looks to us. These systems are dynamic. They cannot explain themselves. They are emergent in the sense that there's behaviors we don't expect, and they are still learning. And the book is about what happens when humans interact with that kind of intelligence. What we say in the book is that this new generation of AI over the next decade or two is going to be an epochal change in human experience, because we've never had another intelligence that's human-like, that's not human. We'll be working with it, but we'll also get mad at it. We'll be worried about it. It will change things. It will change the way a child grows up. It'll change the way we do military strategy. It's how do we do defenses? How do we do war at the speed of milliseconds? These sorts of questions no one's asking. We hope we've written the first book that will start a whole generation of people thinking about how to solve these problems.
But do we need almost a global body? I don't know. I don't know if we should use the word regulation, but to oversee this, because, you know, you and I have often talked about the U.S. and China, and I know there's a great fight going on over who's going to win that AI battle. But their approach to this, I imagine, is going to be very different than ours, for example.
Well, of course it is. And in fact, they've established a goal of being dominant in artificial intelligence by 2030. Since AI will be the basis of pretty much every industry that you talk about on Squawk Box, it's really important that American firms in the West be the leaders, be the economic and structural and scientific leaders in the space. Can you imagine if all the companies that you talked about were in fact Chinese and not American made? That's the kind of stuff we're talking about, the power of this technology. We spent a lot of time in our book talking about network platforms. One of the core things that we believe is it's important that global network platforms reflect American values, Western values, and not Chinese values. So we're in a competition. The interesting thing about the competition is that there's no discussion about what the rules of the competition should be. There's no diplomacy about what happens with cyber war. There's no diplomacy with what happens with conflict that occurs so quickly that could be destabilizing. We go on and on about the societal implications that people have not thought about in our book, which is why I'm so excited about it.
Eric, on the screen, I don't know if you can see it, we have a list of what used to be the FANG stocks. I saw in the column by Maureen Dowd over the weekend, which was great, that you've renamed it the MANG stocks, and we have Meta Platforms here. And the reason I even raise it is because when you talk about building platforms, I'm curious about who you think controls all of this in the end, whether there are a bunch of companies that do it separately, or if it's going to be integrated in a way that it isn't today.
Well, the genius of the American system is you have the government helping with early funding, venture capital making these companies possible, enormous capital available. These are multi-trillion-dollar corporations, which is incredible, and they're going to continue to grow. They're not going to get combined into one company or anything like that. And it's going to be difficult to regulate them because they're so complicated in the way that they work. We got to come to some agreements on, for example, AI-enabled war. What does it mean to allow for misinformation? What is the rule? One of the things that we didn't understand 10 years ago was that governments would use the internet to affect elections. That's clearly not okay. We did not understand that these AI-enabled systems would become so good that they can target the particular biases of specific individuals, and they can be used for misinformation.
But
we just
Eric, here's the complicated part. The complicated part is a lot of tech executives, including Mark Zuckerberg and others, have said, please come regulate us. We can't do this on our own. We shouldn't be doing this on our own. But then when it comes to the actual moments of regulation, this is sort of like the tax debate. A lot of people say, please come tax me. But then the second they actually have to tax them, it gets complicated quickly. How do you do it?
Well, you have the problem when a company asks for regulation, you have the problem of regulatory capture, where the corporation can essentially capture the regulators and they can sort of coexist. This field is so new. What we call for in the book is actually a renaissance of thinking about this. We've got to get the technical people talking to the philosophers and talking to the people who understand human psychology. These systems will change the way we live. Imagine, for example, a baby growing up that's got their best friend is not a human, it's a computer. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about the shaping of that young mind? That's an experiment we've never done. We're going to have to come up with mechanisms and collective agreement on how that should behave. The general answer in capitalist systems is competition. The problem is that these systems can compete in such a way that they will optimize against specific objectives. We want everyone to be happy, or at least mostly happy. We don't want them to optimize around a specific thing, which is what's happening today, which is around engagement.
While I have you here, I got to ask you a couple quick questions. I did mention Meta before. I'm very curious about the rebranding of Meta and your take on that, given that you lived through the rebranding, but also the reorganization, which I think is different in this case, of Google to Alphabet.
You know, it's funny that when you spend your time talking about a company, about the founders and the organization instead of the products, that's always a loss. Right. I look forward to excellent innovation in the metaverse. I've been waiting for about 30 years. The metaverse is a very interesting idea. It's essentially a virtual world that we would inhabit. As to whether Facebook will build that, I don't know. I guess I should call them Meta. But I'm going to continue to call them Facebook. Everyone's still called Google, which is, I think, how it really works. You know, it's interesting that Meta means more comprehensive and transcendent. And so Facebook will now have to be more comprehensive and transcendent at what it does. The promise of the metaverse is very powerful. So if they pull it off, which will be presumably more than a decade, you can imagine virtual worlds that you'll live in, right? And that the world that you live in will be, you'll be younger and more powerful and stronger, and you'll have greater fun and all that kind of stuff. I wonder what happens when the metaverse is so powerful that you choose to live in the metaverse and not in the real world. That's another question we talk about in our book.
If you're a regulator hearing about the metaverse for the first time, does this make you more inclined to think, okay, we got to regulate these companies, or less inclined? I mean, is this a shift here?
I don't think that the conversation with about regulation and keep writing laws to regulate killer robots. Well, we're not building killer robots. We're building systems that everyone will coexist with, which are in some sense much more powerful and much more dangerous, because they'll be with you every day. We're going to have to figure it out. I don't think we know. I don't think regulators today have the right formulation for even how to discuss this.
Eric Schmidt, the book is called The Age of AI and Our Human Future. It's great to see you. Good luck with it.
Thank you, Victor.
Looking forward to seeing you in person soon.
Yes.
Thanks.